Welcome back, everybody. My plan is up for annual at the end of this month, and so I'm going to go up and do some in-flight diagnostic tests that I can then send up to SavvyAnalysis for them to look at the results in detail. I've got an Insight G4 engine analyzer that samples at about 1 time per second or better, and that's ideal for this kind of test. I'm going to go up to 11,500 feet because that's the altitude at which I run at less than 65% power. The two tests I'm going to do are the GAMI sweep, which is the one that requires to be at less than 65% power, and in that test you slowly go from rich to lean, back and forth twice, so cycle through 2 times, 2 minutes each time. And you look at the fuel flow at the time that the first cylinder peaks, and subtract from that the fuel flow at which the last cylinder peaks. That's the GAMI spread. It should be less than 0.5 if you're going to run GAMI ejectors and run the engine smoothly at lean peak. And mine has traditionally run about 0.3, maybe a tad more, 0.4. And so do that one, and then do a lean peak mag check, which you end up at a lean peak setting. You cycle through your mags, left mag both, right mag both, and then look at the shape of the EGTs for each cylinder, and that will give you an idea of how your spark plugs or harnesses is doing. And actually, SavvyAnalysis has very good people who can look at this data and come back to you and tell you if there's any issues. My mags are up for overhaul anyway, so just want to see if they've been running just fine before overhaul. Anyway, see you in flight, and up at 11,500. I am going to wear some oxygen because I know my saturation does drop some, definitely below 94%. I like to keep a clear head. See you up in flight.
Okay, I'm starting at 100 degrees rich of peak, what I estimate to be. I've got 19.7 manifold pressure. My RPM is 2320 according to my Insight G4. I'm going to leave it there. It's running smoothly. And I'm going to turn south here pretty soon so that I can get the sun out of my face and we can get better view of the instrument panel. I lean it out. Go real slow. Go slowly climbing. Looks like one finally peaked. It's going down. I think this was the best test here. Two and 5 look like they peak simultaneously. But that's pretty lean. Let's stabilize there for a bit. Left mag first. They are going to climb. 50 to 100 degrees, but they're supposed to climb. That's burping. Not too bad. Good day. They look pretty stable, although the graph's going to be the telltale one. All right, both. Right mag. 1, 2. All right. Enough. Back to both. On both.
Well, I uploaded the data from my Insight G4 engine analyzer up to SavvyAviation or SavvyAnalysis, and you can see that they allow you to display in graphical form any of that data since the beginning, since engine start to engine shutdown. And you can pick whatever parameters you want on the top and bottom graph. The default setting whenever you come up with a flight is 2 graphs. And your last settings here, your last parameters you may have picked. So for example, I could have picked manifold pressure, and all I see in red is manifold pressure and blue is fuel flow, which is the pick which I have selected over here. And the same thing on the bottom graph, CHT versus any other parameter you want to pick. So let me go back to EGTs, and you'll see that it shows my run up, EGTs going up and down over here, my takeoff with fuel flow going up to 28 and 28.1 at one point right there, which is where I want it. It's a little higher than it's supposed to be, but that keeps my CHTs number 5 fairly low, or as low as I can. And the good thing is that EGTs are just at specs of what they should be for takeoff. So my shading overreads by 4%, so this is actually somewhat lower by 4%. You can see that my CHT number 5 went up to 365 degrees, and it was a hot day, and I'm at basically sea level, so that's not too bad. If I were at a higher altitude airport on a hot day as well, 90, 100 degrees, it'd probably be a little hotter, but I know I will not get over 380 degrees, which is just fine. As far as I'm concerned, I would not want my CHTs to be above that. Before I raised up the fuel flow, they were typically getting up to 380, maybe even 390, a couple times at 400, and I didn't like that at all. You can also see that CHT number 5 is about, it's got a spread in temperature from the other cylinders by about 40-50 degrees, and the reason for that in this particular engine, the IO-550, is because it sits right behind the alternator and doesn't get as good of an airflow as the other cylinders. So I climbed up to 11,500, as you saw in the flight, and I was running rich, about 14.1, 14.2 gallons per hour. And then I did my GAMI sweep. Leaned out, richened, leaned out, richened, leaned out, richened 3 times. And the last one was over here. So let me zoom into this, and you'll see a little particular feature that SavvyAnalysis enables in their graphs. So I'm going to zoom in all the way through the end of the last sweep right here. And then, this is a little not easy to look at, so I'm just going to toggle the GAMI mode, and you'll see what happens. It just leaves one graph, and much easier to actually visualize changes. Because I've done this a few times in the past, and they've been consistently spreading about 0.3 gallons per hour between the first cylinder, the fuel flow at which the first cylinder peaked, and the fuel flow at which the last cylinder peaked. That's the GAMI spread, which is perfect for being able to run GAMI ejectors or running an engine at lean of peak, and GAMI injectors make it much easier. So to actually adjust the fuel flows to each cylinder. So I've done it fairly quickly, which means that there was not enough time for all the EGTs to really get through and stabilize and go up slowly and go back down slowly, and may have introduced a little bit of error in the data. The last sweep is the slowest one and the most accurate in this case. So that's what I'm going to look at here. You can see exactly how you can figure out the spread. So let me start at the beginning of the sweep and go to the end of the sweep in terms of going from rich to lean. And I'm going to drill in a little bit more again, because otherwise it's a little bit harder to visualize. So I'm going to start. The red line is the red one is EGT number 1, which is the leanest one and peaks first. I'm going to start right here, and we'll go all the way to here where all cylinders have already peaked and are on the way down. If I use their feature where they actually do the calculation themselves, I can pick, for example, the beginning of this. So let's say that I've got 1457 over here, 1457 over there, number 1, 1457 again. So I'm going to start it here and end the place where they'll pick up the last cylinder to peak here. And we'll see that they come up with 0.2. And they'll tell you which is the first one to peak. The first one to peak is this red one. And the fuel flow for it is 12.5, as you can read right here. And the last one to peak they have as the yellow one, which is number 2. And that's their software that analyzes it. When you look at it, at the graph itself, the numbers are a little bit different. Let's look at it actually. So over here where my EGT number 1 is at 1457, they thought that this was the last 1457. Actually, we have another one up here. So it went back up to 1457, and now it really dropped, never saw that number again. So the fuel flow is actually still 12.5 at that point. So we'll keep that in mind. Plug into our calculator. And then, which is the last cylinder to peak? As I said, usually my last one is number 5, which is the green one. Let's see if that's still the case. At this point, it looks like number 6, 1481, is the highest number you'll ever see in it. So that's correct over here. And let's see where number 5, which is the green one, peaks. So here we have 67, and here we have 67 again. So it peaked really after number 2. And the next value, it's either 12.3, or if you look at the number where it dropped next, it's actually, so here we have 12.3, went to 12.2. So if you did it visually, you would get 0.3 GAMI spread, which is still superb and outstanding. And my engine runs very smoothly at lean of peak, and quite lean of peak as well, as you saw from the lean of peak mag check. So let's go look at the mag check right now. Untoggle the GAMI spread. Let's unzoom and just go zoom into the lean of peak mag check right there. All right, so just like they had a GAMI toggle, they've got a mag check toggle. And let's see what happens here. Lo and behold, now we have 2 graphs. But what they've done for us, they've separated out the right-sided spark plugs from the left-sided spark plugs. And this is right and left when looking at the engine from the pilot side. Not from the front of the airplane, but from the pilot side. And if we recall that the right mag fires the top plugs in the right-sided right side of the engine. Then we can identify which plug is actually one that may have a problem, or if they're all working fine. And the left mag fires the top plugs on the left side of the engine and the bottom plugs on the right side, and again vice versa. I didn't mention this initially, but so the right mag fires the top plugs on the right, bottom plugs on the left. Which are the right-sided cylinders in this Continental? 1, 3, and 5, and it put the right-sided cylinders or plugs on the top and left on the bottom, which are 2, 4, and 6. So let me go to my iPad and look at the annotated graph I have of this, and so you can look at it a little bit more detail. Well, here's the annotated graph of the lean of peak mag check I did, and let's go through it. First, why do we do a lean of peak mag check? Well, at lean of peak, you're running obviously a fairly lean mixture, and therefore combustion is very important, is very dependent on a good spark, and therefore a lean of peak mag check will display and reveal ignition failures and problems much better than if it were done at rich of peak in flight. That's why we do it lean of peak, and that's what Mike Bush has suggested all throughout. Of course, you got to be able to run lean of peak. So therefore, you need GAMI ejectors to do that well. Anyway, as I said earlier, the top graph has number 1s, 3, and 5 cylinders or plugs, and the bottom graph has number 2, 4, and 6, which is the left-sided plugs. When we go on the left mag, we fire the top left plugs and bottom right plugs, and vice versa. We go on the right mag, we fire the top right plugs and bottom left plugs. When I was on the right mag, number 1 plug on the top displayed a somewhat erratic wave shape, and you can see that here. It's the only one that really does that, and therefore it's misfiring a little bit. It's not bad, it's just misfiring, needs cleaning. They're fine wire plugs, and they last much longer and perform much better. And they're going to be taken off at annual anyway, which comes up in 2 weeks, so that problem should be solved after annual. Everything else is running fine. The interesting part of this whole lean of peak mag check was that usually the bottom plugs are the ones that perform worse, and therefore you see a higher EGT change than on the bottom plugs. So if the left mag is going to fire the top left plugs, which are these here, let me do that in a different color. Which are these here, left mag firing the top plugs on the left side, their EGT should rise less than when the right mag fires the bottom plugs on it, which is here. It's backwards for some reason, and I'm not sure why. I have tested the P-lead continuity to make sure that the ignition switch actually grounds the P-lead on the correct magneto when it's supposed to be grounding it, and it's doing just fine. So since I'm going to have the mags overhauled at this annual, it's basically 500 hours since last time, then I'll triple check and ask them to triple check that the P-leads are well connected and the ignition switch is doing what it's supposed to do. Anyway, it's the top number 1 being an issue, bit of an issue, and it's always been inverse in terms of left and right mag switch selected by the ignition switch. I'll verify that again this time. So that's that conclusion of my mag check. I hope you got a lot out of this whole flight and got an idea of what you can do in your engine or with your engine and with a good engine analyzer. Just got to make sure that the sample rate is high enough, at least one sampling per second, and that you can download the data. Once that's those two factors are there, you can at least download fuel flow, EGTs, CHTs, manifold pressure, RPM, voltages, outside air temperatures, and so on. Everything else is maybe a little bit superfluous, but that's basically what you need. And upload it to Savvy, and you can get a lot of stuff done on their website, and they can assist you as well. And they produced a report, was very nice. Let me show you that here as the last thing I'm going to show you, and give you an idea what it looks like. Well, here's the report from SavvyAnalysis, or SavvyAviation. And you can see that there's my client comments, there's summary of findings, then each individual test that they have, or the things they look at: power, engine monitor, electrical, ignition, temperatures, power plant management, and finally overall recommendations right down here. And so obviously the GAMI lean test, the spread that they come up with is a little bit higher than what I came up with over here, the spread, and that's because of how fast I went through the GAMI sweep. The ignition, they say satisfactory, however, they say there's a marginal plug. Let me do something here. There's a marginal plug, and number one, on the second mag, the top mag has some misfire, which we saw on the graph as well. Everything else looks good, and there were final recommendations, and they say that the mixture is slightly worse than it was before. That didn't work out well. Mixture is slightly worse than it could have been than it was before. However, they do say that it could be because of the data, and I think that's the case. So they do a superb job in giving you a report. They look at everything. They look at things they never even thought they might even look at. One time I was flying on a long trip up to Minnesota, and they found that the baffling may be flopping back and forth on one side, which is absolutely true. Once I landed, I found out that baffle was not sitting right. So they do a superb job in doing these analyses. Anyway, that's the end of it, the whole diagnostic in flight. Going to annual. I'm now armed with things I can tell the A&P over there, the shop, what to do, what to look for sure, and what to clear out. And some of those things we're going to do anyway. Hopefully you all get a chance to do this on your own and look at the data yourself and send it up to Savvy and have them give you some insight into how your engine is running. See you next flight.